So, the current European framework is still regulated by the Lisbon Treaty, which was signed in 2007 and came into force in 2009. Since that time, the European Union is faced with a series of unprecedented crises that put a strain on the strength and unity of Europe. Just to mention some of the most relevant ones, the Eurozone crisis in 2009, the migrant crisis in 2015, the Brexit referendum in 2016, the COVID crisis in 2020, and the Ukraine invasion by the Russian Federation a couple of months ago, which could trigger an energy crisis and further exacerbate inflationary pressures. 3 decades after the Maastricht Treaty, up to now the last big gamble of European integration, the era of radical innovation through treaty change has gone. EU governments have been struggling to find common ground on how to drive forward the European project in a more than ever heterogeneous EU, concerned by the significant electoral support of populist and nationalist parties. The Conference on the Future of Europe was meant to mark a return to a comprehensive approach to EU reforms in addition to being an experiment in deliberative democracy. This pan-European democratic exercise with citizen-led series of debates and discussion ran from April 2021 to May 2022. And on Europe's Day, on 9th of May 2022, after months of intense deliberations, the conference concluded its work, putting forward a report on the final outcome, which includes 49 proposals to the 3 EU institutions, covering topics such as climate change, health, social justice, role of the EU in the world, rule of law, security, EU democracy, migration, and many others. So, my first question, and I would like to start with you, Mr. Goerens, is here in Brussels and in Strasbourg, we have been discussing a lot about the conference, the future of Europe. But looking at media coverage and national politics, there's very little debate on that. So, can the Conference on the Future of Europe be the kickoff for a new season of concrete radical reforms, or will it remain a mere abstract exercise of the so-called EU bubble? Please.
Well, let me say above all that the Conference on the Future of Europe was a real success. We gave basic democracy a try, and at the end of the day, we were very successful in order to indicate some 49 proposals with 325 more precise and pertinent measures. In this sense, it was really a success. The question is whether there will be a serious follow-up. Follow-up is crucial in this regard. If not, we will have disappointed young people participating in this exercise, and that would be a very unpleasant. In my view, it's a serious exercise, and we are already prepared, at least among the more responsible political forces in the European Parliament, to give this try, which once again was very successful. We'll follow up.
Thank you very much. So my follow-up question is, as Mr. Goerens was reminding of the 49 proposals, which it's quite ambitious to propose, which are, according to you, like the most relevant ones, and let me say also the realistic ones, the ones that could be realized by the institutions.
And so I was part of the working group democracy, so I don't have an overview of all the different parts that are in there. I think it's also a bit presumptuous to say, okay, I like this and this more than the other proposals that are there. I think we need to check them all. And so what's happening is that, yes, we fast-track basically saying, like, look, the proposals from the working group democracy, there are some that need treaty change, which is why we want to trigger the process, because it will take some time until it's going. But what we are also doing now in the Constitution Committee is to start a longer process of actually looking at all the different proposals and understanding where would they fall in? How can we best make them happen? Do we need new legislation? Do we need recasts? Do we need to find other non-regulatory kind of proposals to make them work? And I think this needs to be done. And you know, if you start thinking about what's realistic from the beginning, then I think you will never achieve much. I think what we need to do from the European Parliament side is to take them all seriously and try to push as strong as we can in the direction to make them happen. Because as Mr. Goerens has said, from my perspective, these are really thought through proposals. Yeah, there was a lot of time that went into it, and you're right, maybe not every citizen in the European Union saw what was happening, but it was a meaningful participation mechanism in the sense that people had the time. They weren't like constrained by political views from the beginning, but they really had the citizen assemblies without politicians and could really think about stuff. And then it was discussed also with politicians together. And so I think we should honor that, and we should try to follow up as best as possible. And not just with like one sentence in a council conclusion.
Yeah? That's absolutely right. And coming back with a similar question, like, is there any among these proposals that the European Parliament should really stress the point on reforming the EU?
Yes, our first conclusion was that we do need a real upgraded institutional setup. That's very important in order to overcome the difficulties created by the series of crises. And we have to do that in order to be prepared to allow the European Union to play its role in the world, in the global world. Our democracy, our model of democracy is threatened by Russia for the time being. Russia was posterior to the launching of the conference, but never the fact it has clearly impacted the outcome of the conference. In my view, it's very important to proceed as such. We cannot go on with the same procedures because we are not prepared. Other blocks or political entities have closed up their decision-making process, and the European Union is still in the middle of nowhere. Rapid decisions. We are not prepared. We have to deal with the most reluctant people when it comes to budget. We have to deal with the most reluctant people when it comes to increase sanctions against Russia, for instance, in order to be very close to what is happening in today's world. Yes, we are convinced, Mr. Boeselager and myself, and most of the members of the European Parliament see it like us. But unfortunately, 13 member states are not in the same have not the same expectations. For them, we need still stand still concerning the institutions. That's impossible. We must overcome this. We must explain our public opinions before the next European elections. That it's crucial to be prepared for the 21st century. We are far from being in this shape. We have to do our utmost in order to be prepared. As far as the European Parliament is concerned, I once again stress that the European Parliament, in its huge majority, has already expressed its will to change the treaties in the Verhofstadt report, voted in the Parliament in the last legislature, and we had two reports on the institutional setup, one from Guy Verhofstadt and another from Borg-Bresso. The Borg-Bresso report was a report dealing with measures that could be decided without changing the treaty, and the Guy Verhofstadt report was a listing of measures that could be part of treaty change. We do need a policy change, and not all the policy changes can be realized without a treaty change.
Can I jump on this?
Of course.
Yeah, and so I think that's the crucial distinction also for me. There is a difference between, what kind of topics, we should do on climate change, migration, and so on. There's a range of recommendations in there. And I think they will need to go through the normal majority kind of finding process that exists in politics. Yeah, I mean, there will be some conservatives, liberals, Greens, and what will come out of that will somehow reflect that, and it should, because that's what we got elected for. And then there are the how proposals, and they are more in the question of how do we take decisions. And I think what you have also said in the introduction, and also Mr. Goerens just said, is how we take decisions is currently too intransparent, too ineffective, and sometimes because of that also too unaccountable. So like it's not accountable enough. And so I think if we understand that we are a bit of a crossroads of either developing the European Union further so it can actually function and be transparent, be effective and accountable, that means developing it into the most normal thing that we know, which is on the local level, regional level, and national level we already have, which is a parliamentary democracy. Then we should also get this done on the European level, because if we don't get there, I think with the current system, which is still at its heart when it comes into a crisis, an intergovernmental system where you have medieval circumstances of 27 heads of state and government sitting together and bartering out deals, this model will at some point find its deadlock. It has often done it already in the Migration Pact and the sanctions and many other elements. And I think if you understand that this is not going to continue like this, you need to know that you need to progress it to the next level. And I think we all agree on that.
Yeah, thank you. And highlighting what you just said, Mr. Boeselager, on the 27 member states battling every time and very often coming to a deadlock, and what you, Mr. Goerens, just said previously on the rapid decisions needed. One of the measures proposed by the Conference on the Future of Europe would be to switch from the unanimity rule in the Council to qualified majority. So, but it looks that there are two visions at the moment in the EU, like those member states that says that, of course, it will be less effective and less quick if we continue to be compelled by this unanimity rule, and those that says we should just move forward together, even with small steps, but we will split it even further if there will be majority on certain issues like foreign policy. So what's your stance on that, and how do we convince the other member states that are against the switching to qualified majority to change their mind?
Well, perhaps we do need an additional crisis in order to make the European governments change their mind in this regard, because as you see, after 2008, we had done a lot in order to secure the euro, our common currency. After the outbreak of the COVID crisis, we were able to make European fiscal policy more, give it a solidarity touch, a real solidarity touch, by approving the recovery plan, which, to say the least, is close to 850 billion euro, with a debt which will be repaid after 2026 through the European budget. Either we will have new own resources, or the next multi-financial framework will be a very difficult one in order to be deprived of a huge part of its resources. If we have no additional resources called new own resources for the European community, then the agricultural policy, regional policy, all solidarity implemented through the European budget will be less important than nowadays, and then we will have a huge disappointment by our people. That's not the way to proceed. We have to convince day by day our citizens to overcome this situation. Given the fact that we have had a very successful outcome of the Conference of the Future of Europe, we can say that this set of proposals, 49 proposals and 325 measures, are representative for the European people. It's a set of young people, of European citizens that were able to make this kind of proposal. And it was really amazing to see that this could happen. And as I said in my introductory remarks, we will have to give this a serious follow-up. It's up to the institutions to convince all the other citizens, or the critical mass of citizens, in order to be able in all the member states to have a real pressure on their leaders to finally agree on a treaty change. We must overcome this. I cannot imagine the United States play this kind of role in the world without having their leadership and their the decision-making process. It cannot work otherwise. Either we are still under the pressure of the Russian Federation or under the dictatorship of others in NATO, in all the other parts of the international policy, or we are convinced that we must overcome this situation by give policy change a chance through a treaty change. I spent already 4 decades in politics, and I am still convinced that politics is about choice. We have to make this choice and to explain it to our public opinion. When I have the opportunity to meet citizens in my constituency, I can explain it. And I can say at the end of the day that I have been understood by them. Well, let's make our effort. Nothing is impossible.
Thanks. And as on the day of the closing ceremony of the Conference on the Future of Europe, 10 countries, mainly from North and East Europe, circulated a joint document opposing the launch of such procedure to change the bloc's treaties, considering premature the attempts to launch a process towards treaty change. So, and as Mr. Goerens was already mentioning, we had so many cases that we saw how difficult it is to find common ground among 27 member states. So my question is it a possibility to consider a multi-speed Europe as a potential solution, especially on certain areas, like, for example, foreign policy, considering also that that is already allowed by the treaties with the enhanced cooperation? And if we think, for example, at the single currency, not all the EU member states have the euro. So is that an option?
So when we started Volt, like writing our program, we also thought, how cool would it be if you had something like in German we call it Schalenmodell, like a layered model where you can easily go from full integration to like a little less integration with like less duties but also less benefits, and then you somehow clarify the current chaos that we have with Eurozone and all these different kind of layers. But very soon when we started talking to our Eastern European new members, they were very critical of that and said, this is normally used to say we want to do something without you guys from the East. And so I have become a bit more careful about that concept. And I would say we need to reform the European Union as a whole. Enhanced cooperation is not really a two-speed Europe because you still maintain the European Parliament as a whole, but like to also think about what kind of sub-parliamentary organizations would need to exist if you had multiple speeds. I'm not so much of a fan of it anymore. And then just to also talk about these 13 countries and also to the question of how do we actually get change done. I think we need to be extremely clear in our analysis of what the hindrances are and about the pressures that exist. And so I realized that political actors take decisions based on the costs that are associated with both decisions, like both options that you could take. And what you need to do is you need to raise the cost for not opting for more European integration. And how do you do that is a good question. If one is you can obviously push within the European community, and that's what we are doing from within AFCO, and we're trying to basically raise the pressure within the institutions to the maximum level that we can achieve within the current setting. But then there's another level of pressure, and that is via the national context, because obviously these national governments, national parties see little interest in actually, potentially granting more powers to the level above them, because they just feel as a national party, I would lose from that. And the few European-minded people often have a hard time to actually counter that national interest. And so, and sorry for like bringing a little marketing in there, but what I think you need to do is you need to steal their votes to make it hurt. And that's what we're trying to do with Volt by basically saying like, if you don't have a clear answer of where you want Europe to go, we're trying to campaign against you until it hurts. And so I think the question is, If that's not your way, then we need to find other ways to pressure national governments, national parties, to make it costly for them not to act in that direction.
Any reaction on the multi-speed Europe?
Well, we have still a multi-speed Europe. We have the euro, as colleague Boeselager said. We have not all the members are involved in the same importance in defense matters. Ireland is still a neutral country, Austria too. After the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, we have a more complete image of what will be in the future the European defense. We have Article 24. The mutual assistance in case of conflict. It's a kind of Article 5, but soft Article 5 of NATO. You mentioned in your presentation that I used to be president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Western European Union. The Western European Union was based on Article 5 of the Brussels Modified Treaty by the Paris Agreements. And this treaty said that once a country is attacked by an external country, all the others are committed to defend it automatically, without being obliged to consult their own parliaments. We have never reached this kind of solidarity in the European institutional framework. In my view, the Article 5 of the Brussels Modified Treaty was better. And if Ukraine, for instance, joins the European Union, Ukraine will be protected in a certain sense, but it will always be a gray zone. What's the real involvement? What could be the real involvement of the other European states? Because NATO is out now. I cannot imagine that the outcome of the hostilities in Ukraine will lead to a NATO-friendly Russia. No, I cannot imagine that. But in my view, it's more ironically, an ironic point of view, we should give the treaty change a try. See who, at the end of the day, is ready to launch a convention, which later on leads to an intergovernmental conference, which is a conditio sine qua non to change the treaty, unless we can use the passerelles laid down in the existing treaties. And then, if, for instance, we had at the end of the day 20 countries agreeing on launch of an institutional of a convention, then we could try to convince the other. If not, and that's my proposal, the 20 countries should trigger the Article 50, go out and create a new European Union based on a treaty which really represents and reflecting solidarity among the members. But I am sufficiently realistic to know that this would be difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and the letter you said would be, of course, a kind of enhanced cooperation. And Mr. Goerens was mentioning about
let me just say, in addition to that, that the treaty after the 2008 crisis, the fiscal crisis, the monetary crisis, is not integrated in the European Treaty. The European Commission acts as a secretariat to the Eurozone, but it's not laid down in a treaty. It was promised at that time, but it's an international treaty under the international law. I can imagine that we could have in the future several additional treaties evolving in parallel to the existing treaties, unless we will be able to integrate all these satellites into the institutional framework. At the end of the day, we should have a unique institutional framework. You cannot you cannot imagine the European Union functioning with 3, 4, 5 different treaties, but one day, sooner or later, let's hope sooner, Orban will no longer be in power. The same will happen to Poland. As far as I see it, young people are on the line. Boeselager and myself are defending here. Because young people in Warsaw, in Prague, in Paris, in Luxembourg, in Berlin are the same. As far as I can see it, they have the same expectations, and they expressed it through their proposals laid down in the Conference on the Future of Europe. I'm rather optimistic, even if for the time being it's quite difficult to achieve it, but nevertheless, let's be innovative.
That would be a good wave of hope, of course, for the European project. Coming back to the point of external threats, and of course we all know like the Russian aggression to Ukraine, but on that point, like we have been speaking about European defense since the 50s, and little has been achieved on that. We now see that, like for example, the German Chancellor has put 100 billion euro for enhancing the defense, but it's a national measure. So isn't it time come for a common European army and a common European defense policy, and how we should move forward on that?
So first of all, I think, you know, when we think about the strategy of just to build also a bit and then come to the defense, but like what Charles said, like I think the crises are here. Yeah, they're coming and they're basically here. We have the rule of law crisis, as you mentioned, and it's not getting better currently. And hopefully, you know, maybe new governments will come and solve it. But like currently, it looks not that great. We have an inflation crisis right now. We have a global food crisis. We have, we have a war at our borders. And my personal perspective is that the economic forecasts of the Union are far too optimistic. And I'm not so much like seeing how this situation will dissolve without a serious economic downturn that will actually affect all of our living standards. And so in that kind of context, I think it's good to push as much as we can anyways for treaty change. And then nobody knows if we manage to actually, you know, trigger a conference, even if they say we want to, or convention, even if they want to keep it limited, the situation is evolving so rapidly that I think nobody knows what the situation will look like in a year from now. And maybe then everybody will say like, okay, we definitely need, you know, some form of, so maybe they will say we need some form of defense union. Yeah. And I mean, the arguments here are very strong. If you look at the Munich Security Conference report from, I don't know, when it was like 2019 or something, there you can see that we have 19 different tank systems for the same tank category in Europe. So the argument that I always also bring is you can actually save money for defense and be more, you know, resilient or have better defense capabilities if you would actually somehow let certain countries prioritize certain form of defense industry and capabilities. So, for example, I would say, you know, if we had a functioning compass, but a functioning European defense system, you would say Estonians, you do cybersecurity because you're really good at like tech stuff. You know, I don't know, the French will keep the U-boats, what is it called, submarines, and you know, like, and you can somehow try to map that out. But I think it would be necessary. But then the question is, who gives orders to that kind of army? And here, for me, I'm a huge fan of, first of all, of some form of a defense army, even though that was undermined a bit in the German context because defense suddenly is everywhere, you know, like in Mali or Afghanistan. And the second question is, like, shouldn't it be under the power of parliament to decide when such an army should be deploying, or would you really want to give that to some form of a, you know, European government? And then I think it begs the question of, if the European government is involved and if there's some form of a, you know, I don't know what you call it, supreme leader in terms of military command, then how is this person accountable to parliament, and how is this person accountable to the European people? And there again, you just don't get around the question that you need a European government that is somehow elected by European Parliament, and the European Parliament should control that kind of European government with the defense minister or defense commissioner or whatever in a way that makes sense. I mean, so even if you just take the defense union as like the simple thing to just, you know, work out, I don't think you can work it out without changing the decision making and the accountability of the European Union as a whole.
Yeah, and what Mr. Boeselager was describing what could look like a EU federal state with EU government and EU parliament that votes on that. So we know that the geopolitics of 21st century is done by macro-regional blocks. We have Russia, we have China, we have the United States, we have the EU, which hasn't still the power, as you were saying before, of playing as a protagonist on the international scene. So, like, is it time come for the EU to give themselves to switch from a soft power and become a hard power?
Yes, we are a soft power. I used to be Minister of Defense and Minister of Development, Cooperation and Humanitarian Relief at the same time. And I could make a difference between soft power and real power, military power. That doesn't mean that Luxembourg is a real military power. We are part of a defense system. We are part of NATO. We are part of the European Union, and we have to pay our share in order to be prepared to meet the next threats. It's up to the Europeans to define their role. The United States will no longer oppose a new and additional European effort in order to overcome this situation. We are in a weak position, and I could not imagine what could happen if Donald Trump will be re-elected in 2 years. That will be the truth for the European Union. How do we react to that? And it's not in 2024 that we will have to react to that. We have to react to that now. And we have to increase our effort in order to be close to 2% of defense expenditures in relation to the GDP. Germany has announced to undertake this effort. France is close to 2%, and others will have to do the same. We have a gap over the last 2 decades, through the fact that we are very far from 2% ratio of more than 1,000 billion euros. And we have to fill the gap in the next years. If not, we will be dependent. We will be condemned to stay as a soft power. And let's not forget that our democracy, our European model of life, is threatened by the most important emerging powers, China. Concerning India, we are not sure what will be their position in the global world, but it's up to the European Union to know what they have to do. We have acknowledged all the needs. It's up to us to act now. That does not mean that we will have a single European army, but as Damian said, we will have a defense model where every country can pay a contribution. The contributions of all the member states must be complementary. They have been to be organized in this regard. And at the last NATO summit, the European members of NATO and all the NATO members agreed to be prepared to launch a 300,000 strong battalion to be activated in a very short period of time. And that's the rapid reaction to the political situation dominated by the Russian invasion into Ukraine. I think we have understood a lot. It's now up to us to act. And that will be very challenging for the European Union. I share the weak forecast just mentioned by Damian concerning the economy in the short term. I think inflation combined with all difficulties we will meet through the several crises. We have not yet overcome the COVID crisis, will bring us in a very difficult, challenging period. And I cannot exclude that a critical mass of members of the European Parliament will request an additional recovery plan? If not, how can we ensure that Italy, France, threatened by huge debt, some of them huge external debt, how they can overcome this without seeing an increase in the spread of interest rates? Before the 2008 crisis, France spent more in its service debt than in its educational system. Now we have a reversed system, and it's still difficult for France to find an answer to all the expectations of the French citizens. You know, the Gilets jaunes, they expressed the disappointment of the lower middle class, and it is still a problem increased by all the crises we are facing nowadays. I am sure that the answer can only be a political answer, and this political answer can only be an effective European answer. That means that we'll have to transfer competencies from the European, from national states to the European Union. The intergovernmental system has lived. The intergovernmental system is an absolute no-go for the time being and for the times ahead.
Thanks, and I think that of course the challenges ahead, and as Mr. Goerens was mentioning about security, but many more, like for example climate change or industrial policy. We see with energy, we see with supply chain issues that we had during COVID, and it was mentioning the investments also, because many member states has huge debts, and it would be different to be invested at the EU level. So like the question is the sense of urgency perceived, and as Mr. Goerens was saying, to act now, and is there enough political will to respond at the EU level and to move forward for the EU project?
I have to laugh because I mean look at the German Chancellor and the German Finance Minister, and then try to write sense of urgency next to that. You know, like I've never seen such miscommunication, almost disinformation of your own public by a government. And this sounds mean, but the way that currently, even when I talk to social democratic colleagues in the European Parliament from Germany, there is this general understanding that there is a bit of an issue, but like soon there will be an armistice and then the Russian gas will flow again. This is literally what people tell me, and I'm just like surprised by you know the view and the morals, and I don't know whatever you think about that, but I think the urgency will be so blatant that even Mr. Scholz will at some point have to react to the situation. And even though I'm not, you know, I sit with the Greens, but I'm not a Green Party member, but I do think that the Minister of the Economy has some plans on how to react to the current situation. If you see his style, Habeck's style of communicating, then the urgency is much higher. I mean, just yesterday and today, he was communicating about the fact of whether Nord Stream 1 will actually be turned on again after the period of halting for maintenance. And then I just agree, like, I think when you, I mean, I thought that the original reaction instantly should have been to cut off gas, because you can't actually cut off gas from a Russian side easily. It's a very difficult process, but to stop gas payments instantly, and to combine it with as I called it, an EU unity fund, where you say we will deal with the sanction effects and the export crisis effects, which is also actually a big problem for a lot of the Eastern European member states that are exporting or have a heavy export reliance on the Russian market, that you somehow try to gather that all with a common, if you want, solidarity fund. And the interesting difference between the Corona pandemic fund and this new unity fund would be that Corona was actually trying to spur consumption and investment to a certain extent. As consumption was not originally planned to be, you're not allowed to finance consumption or consumptory investments with it, but still the idea was to you know, accelerate the multiplier effect. But in the current circumstance, you have an inflation environment. And so the question is, if you now push new money into an already inflationary market, how do you deal with that? And so what we thought would make sense is that you actually, what I was very much against in the Corona Fund, is that you refinance strategic investment, and strategic investment being still energy and independence investments, still green investments, still digitalization investments, potentially some more resilience investments that we didn't finance enough, also with the like institutional resilience investments that we didn't finance enough with the Corona Fund, so that you basically, in a situation where the fiscal space, as you said, of all these countries will diminish, first because they have an increasing refinancing cost, and you can see that already roaring if you compare the interest rates for the countries from the start of the war to now. I mean, anyways, you can talk about this once, but and so what will happen is that you also will see unemployment benefits rising. So the overall share of the budget that is non-investing but just transfers and social coverage of the situation, and then plus additional measures which will definitely come and are already planned in Germany and other countries, will mean that the money that you have available to actually invest or to keep the current investments running will decrease. And so what I would say is the European Union could jump in to free up some cash by refinancing existing strategic investments, as I said, in the different categories. And I think for me that will still make sense. I hope that it happens. There is this myth out there with REPowerEU. I don't know if you looked at the program. I'm also a bit, because I negotiate the RF, I will also negotiate REPowerEU. And there's like, they throw these loans around that are supposed to somehow solve the issue that, 270 billion, I think, in terms of loans. And if you just assume that the countries who currently have a higher refinancing cost than the EU will take all these loans away, then you will see that there's nothing left. There's no money left to actually refinance, to finance energy independence. So I do, or like even sanction effects, which is not even the plan. So I do believe that new money will be needed quite soon, but there the urgency, and then with this I stop, sorry, there the urgency is not high enough yet in the member states, but I'm sure it will come. Yeah.
I share what you said on the ABEC's ability to communicate. It's more performant than Scholz's communication, and
he's not communicating so easy.
Communication combined together.
Yeah, that's a very different style of communicating than the German Chancellor, of course.
Who doesn't communicate again?
Coming back to one of the points that we touched before, one of the crises that also Mr. Boeselager mentioned, and was the rule of law. And you were mentioning also all the problems that have been with Orban in Hungary and with the Polish government. So should the European Parliament be equipped with more tools to prevent these breaches of rule of law and address them when they occur, and in which way?
But it's up to the European Parliament to organize itself in order to threaten the Commission. In my view, we should threaten the Commission and say to von der Leyen, either you accept our views shared by a majority of the members of the European Parliament to put an end to the breaches of the rule of law in Poland, or we will undertake a vote against the Commission. That's the way to proceed. And it's up to the Parliament to do that. It's we can repeat always the same statements, but if we stay inactive in this regard, we cannot overcome this situation. We are no longer in the late 50s of the last century, when Zhou Enlai was former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mao Zedong. Was once asked by a French journalist, Mr. Zhou Enlai, what are your views on the impact of the French Revolution on today's behavior among nations? And Zhou Enlai answered, well, it's still too soon to judge. We are no longer in this kind of situation, and we have to act now. And the European Parliament, nobody will replace, and no other institution will replace the European Parliament. If the majority of my group and the large majority of Damian's group, together with the Socialist left and a part of the EPP, were enough courageous, we could really challenge the Commission in this regard, and to put the breach of the rule of law in Poland to bring it to an end. And there are no circumstances attenuant to delay the process.
Yeah, and the main threat on that, of course, the Commission was to freeze the flow of money coming from the EU to these member states. Is it enough, or should there be more measures? Or
I think there's, again, like, obviously there's always a couple of things coming together. The first thing that comes together is that if von der Leyen wants to get re-elected or re-proposed by the Council, she can't piss off any single member state, and that's the reason why Timmermans didn't get, to become Commission president. And so if this continues, that you cannot become Commission president if you piss countries off on the rule of law, then we're in a real pickle. I mean, and I think what Charles is saying is that, like, the only one who can stop that from happening, at least that, you can get through with weakening the rule of law constantly, is the European Parliament. And I think we really try to make it extremely costly for von der Leyen to now walk back on her word, even though she already walked back on her word. I mean, so what happened is that she said, I will never approve the Polish recovery plan until these 3 conditions are met. And these 3 conditions were already not enough. It's not even all the court's judgments. It's just a random selection of that. But anyways, and then she said, I will now approve it, but there will be no money flowing until these 3 conditions are met. And now you can already see that she's trying to do the same with Hungary. I don't know, 70% certain that the Commission will approve the Hungarian plan over the summer, 70%, so not 100, but like with the same kind of horizontal milestones and targets in there, saying you need to fix your corruption issue and your rule of law issue, and then you can get the money. But it's so dumb, because now you can already see that the Polish government is building up pressure on von der Leyen, saying that you said this law is good enough that we did to, abolish the disciplinary chamber in Poland and so. And she's now like trying to say, I mean, this is the weirdest thing. We are not assessing the law until it's submitted. I don't know, it's really weird. But like, she will just be pushed further and further unless someone puts a stop. And I think now we have really showed her that if she actually gives out this money without even her own 3 conditions being met, there will be repercussions to that. And I hate the repercussions, and that's also why I used in my speech on this with her this very carefully, because what happens? We have a European Commission that doesn't have a commission anymore in a inflation crisis, food crisis, energy crisis, and so on. And then we get the same, sorry for the wording, but like, okay, I will not use it, but the same kind of personnel that's proposed by the Council, again, by the same shitty procedure that we then have to, approve for a couple of months until then the next Commission comes. And that's really a very bad scenario, but maybe the costs of that are less than losing the rule of law, battle. So I don't know. It's overall, it's a bad scenario. I would have hoped that with the war, and this I stop, sorry, but that with the war, von der Leyen would have doubled down on the rule of law and would have said, so Orban, I'm sorry, but by blocking stuff, you're now a security risk. I will trigger Article 7. I'm sorry, but like, it's over. Like, I don't have the leeway anymore to accept that our union is weakened in times of war. I don't have that power. I don't. It's too dangerous for my citizens. You are not as important as like the functioning of the union in the times of crisis. I thought she could have done that, and she went the exact opposite way. And I think it's a huge mistake.
And let me go to the last point of our discussion. I'm sure there will be a lot to speak for the rule of law, that maybe some question will come. So Mr. Boeselager was speaking about the election of von der Leyen and why she was chosen, and Timmermans not, because of making enemies in the council. And I would like to go to the Spitzenkandidat process. So this procedure in a certain way has been killed last time, because finally it was chosen none of the Spitzenkandidat. And is this process need to be reconsidered or be improved in a certain way for the upcoming elections in 2 years?
It must be reconsidered and re-improved. I am co-rapporteur together with my colleague Damian from the EPP on the funding of European political parties and foundations. And we try, with our very huge success, to refer to transnationalists in our report. There is not a report underway. made by our colleague Dominic from the Socialist Party. It's the electoral law, and one must consider these two reports in a combined way. We should have, for next elections, transnational lists, which will make the concept of Spitzenkandidaten more credible. The party with the best outcome of the European elections will not be threatened by a majority of the European Parliament to see in the winner of the elections the next President of the Commission. But it must be this must enter into force before the next elections. That's in my view the way to proceed. Unfortunately, the last elections were a little bit more complicated because the German Spitzenkandidat, the president of the EPP political group in the European Parliament, was not accepted by a huge part of the other political parties. That's the reason why Macron didn't agree, didn't implement the elections in the way expected by the EPP. But I am still convinced that we can be successful. Tomorrow we will vote on the report on the funding of European political parties and foundations. We will start the trilogue at the end of September. The Czech presidency is very committed to make its utmost in order to be ready in due time, and then I think we can win this battle. I said it because we have to organize the European decision-making process in a more structured way. If you consider who is nowadays, for the time being, impacting the European public opinion, you have Rupert Murdoch, you have trolls triggered by Russia, you have impacts and influences from everywhere, but the European political system is not strong enough to counter all these threats to democracy. That's the reason why the democracy package, which is under discussion among the European institutions, is of crucial importance for us.
And Mr. Goerens mentioned the transnational list, so I suppose this is music for your ears. As co-founder of Volt, one of the first EU transnational parties. So are the transnational lists one of the solutions to make the EU and the MEPs more accountable to citizens?
So I actually negotiated that law with Dominic Guis-de-Weser on the Electoral Law Act. And I mean, in the end, the negotiations that we had with the Conservatives was really about, do we get the second vote, I would call it like second European vote for European parties? And do we give like on the other side then, a certain threshold for Germany? Yeah? That was the real bargain. Do we get an electoral threshold for Germany? And so an electoral threshold for Germany considerably reduces my risk of getting re-elected. So
you can join the Renew group.
The FDP is not my favorite. I have to say there are other Renew parties which are potentially a bit closer to.
Well, politics is about choice.
Yeah, that's true. So, but I can get re-elected. 3.5% is the final outcome that we negotiated. That's easy. And the reason why I still heavily pushed for the Greens to vote against this threshold, but for the overall act, is because for me, that's, as you said, like it's the core objective. Why? Because it gets us towards a parliamentary democracy. I want people I don't care, there are 28 people going to get elected if this ever gets to council via this list. And so the people is not what I care about, but what I care about is that every European citizen would actually have the chance to vote for a European party. So see the name for the first time, have the same kind of people below that party, and hopefully somewhere look up a program that actually says this is what a conservative Europe would look like. More sanctions against Russia, less immigration, I don't know what, yeah, more money for families. Or this is what a social democratic Europe would look like. This is, you know, higher social standards for workers. I don't know what else they care about. And this is what a green Europe would look like. This is what a liberal Europe would look like. More SME money and innovation is great. You know, and that you could actually then say, I actually like this program for Europe. And then you would have hopefully an effect on the European parties to be more cohesive and to be also bound by the promise that they make or made. And so hopefully you would get into this direction. And yes, then hopefully this would also translate into the leadership of the European Commission. I think this is also why von der Leyen was a bit open to also have this in the conference on the future of Europe, because I mean, the moment when she actually presented this idea of the conference on the future of Europe, which she got from several directions, was in the moment that she needed the confirmation vote of the European Parliament. So she knew she was hated, yeah, because she came out of nowhere and had zero backing from any political group in the sense of actually being their Spitzenkandidat. And so she said, like, oh yeah, that was a shitty process. So here is what we are going to do to actually discuss about how to do it differently. And so I think if we would get the new electoral law in, I think it would really strengthen the idea, because if Manfred Weber or whoever it is can actually say, I got the actual votes of, I don't know, X million European citizens that want the European, Union to be conservative, then maybe he has a stronger point to versus the countries to say, like, look, I'm actually someone that you should put there. That's my hope. So let's hope it gets through. Just on a procedural note, it's also a file that needs that has the great right of initiative for Parliament, which means we make a proposal, then it goes to Council. They can completely butcher the proposal, and then they need to agree unanimously on that proposal, and then we have a yes/no vote in Parliament afterwards. So it's not the easiest process. There's not even a trilogue. They just do whatever they want. So let's see if we can get there by 2024. But I would really hope it.
And that would be, of course, a really big step forward, the fully EU election and not 27 national elections. I think we can open up to questions from the audience. So if there are any questions for our two guests, please.
I speak with both a European and an American, and you know, I snickered when you talked about Trump, because it's frightening. I mean, I literally had to make a choice tonight of coming here to listen to you or to the January 6th hearings that are going on. And for me, as an American following everything that's going on, it seems to me over and over again that what I encounter now, having lived here for 2 years, is that there are so many uneducated young Europeans who don't count themselves enough as a European. And so they have to, in order for you to be able to institute the things you want, it seems to me that people have to understand that the reason we have had until February 24th peace is because Europe came together. And I see there's such a big crack, and I fear for it. And yes, Europe should have an army, and yes, it should be the primary fear that I think we'll have a new face in the Republican Party, but it hopefully will not be Trump. But it's cracking. But I feel this urgency of Europe needs to be less discussion, more prepared, and get it going, so that, because Putin will do what he will, and it's at our doorstep today, tomorrow, whenever the accidental missile happens to hit European ground. It's not really a question, it's more of a passion.
Comment. Maybe we can collect a couple more and then apply all of them. Are there any other?
Well, I want to lead because the conference on the future of Europe was, I think, really successful, because it gathered together many proposals and many youngsters. But I point out, frankly, that it was well known among all fringes of the population. Sadly, although the communication was quite great, I think, but it's really as the EU bubble that it was really felt. But my question is, It's more about the accession of Ukraine to the EU. I was wondering if you felt that it was really a serious proposal that was made, or just to make Zelensky wait for it, and yeah, and your take on this.
Yeah, maybe a last one before we reply. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would first of all would like to thank the speakers for their opinion and their insight views, and then link up to your question first of all. After a small question, which I would like to put in advance, the big challenges we have now, and you referred to it, are climate change, Ukraine war, and state of law situation in the European Union. We discussed it briefly, and I would like to know your opinion about the impact of the Ukraine war on these three items. Will the war, with all its consequences, have a negative impact on the fight against global warming? Because Russia, China may drop out. Also in Europe, we only 3% we make efforts. Secondly, state of law, I think that we agree the impact of this war, which is the major challenge on the state of law debate, is negative right now, and I'm afraid will remain negative. More tolerance for Hungary, Poland, and potential followers. But the third point, and this is the most important, is the impact of the Ukraine war on the treaty changes of the European Union. And here I link up to you. Charles Goerens, he mentioned the big breakthrough at the NATO summit, 300,000 deployable military from 30 or 40,000 we have right now. This is a commitment. Will it be realized or not? We have to see it. What will Europe do? So this is my key question. Do you think there will be a positive impact on the Ukraine war, on the development of a European, call it defense identity, security defense policy, that Europe also may start to imitate the US goals and build a sort of a intervention force which may have an impact? Thank you.
Yeah. Can start maybe with Mr.
Well,
Grant.
that's part of the NATO deal. They have to decide to create an intervention force, a rapid intervention force.
Yeah.
They're composed by 300,000 people.
Europe.
Yes, NATO.
NATO.
Europe is part of NATO, and I think that the European Union has to do the lion's share of this deal to fulfill, in order to fulfill this promise. Concerning the impact of Ukraine on the European Union policy, I think it's amazing. First of all, Ukraine is invited to join the European Union. That's a promise given by the European Union. But the promise given by the European Union to Ukraine is the following: we will act in a way to be enabled together that you will never, ever be under the arbitrary of an external power of Russia. And that leads me to the question, which Ukraine, in which European Union? For the time being, the absorption capacity of the European Union is not sufficient to accept Ukraine as such. We have to adapt ourselves, and Ukraine has to do a lot in order to be committed to the so-called Copenhagen criteria. There is a huge gap between the highly corrupt Ukraine state. We must say, like it is, Ukraine is a highly corrupt state. It's, I think, on place 122 on the international ranking. They must act in a way to leave behind them this kind of behavior. That's a lot. And the European Union is not, for the time being, able or in a capacity to guarantee the respect of the European fundamental values. We promised in 2004 to Poland that they will be for the eternity protected against breaches to fundamental values. And what can we do nowadays? We are not in a position to do that, to keep our promise. And in order to keep our promise, we must change our decision-making process. That means you have to abolish unanimity in this regard, and then we can say, well, if a qualified majority can sanction a country in breach with fundamental values, then we have our utmost in order to keep this promise. But for the time being, it's not the case. State of law, the rule of law, is too serious to not reflect on changes in the treaty, and we have to say that, to explain that to the Ukrainians. I was in favor of the enlargement to 8 Central and Eastern European countries in 2004, because the application to adhere to the European Union was presented by people like Wałęsa, was supported by people like Wałęsa, Goerens. They were convinced and convincing Democrats. They have no leaders like them today in Poland. And as far as Zelensky is concerned, I am sure that he is very determined to do his utmost in order to fulfill the criteria. But he must be put in a position to do that. And the last answer to the question, what's the impact of the Ukraine war on climate change? It's a very negative impact. For the time being, I am a member of the European Parliament on financial architecture on development. And we do need 4,200 billion additional money, allowing us to fulfill the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. 4,200. 5 years ago, it was only 2,400. And the gap is increasing day by day. The reconstruction of the rebuilding of Ukraine will need a lot of money, which will be provided partly through the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development based in London. The money provided to the rebuilding of the Ukraine will not be available for developing countries, and that's a huge effort we have to make. 4,200 billion. That means 4.2% of global GDP. I cannot imagine how we can come closer to the real to realize this goal by additional money spent in Ukraine and for the reconstruction of Ukraine. I am very disappointed. I'm very sad to see that. It's not what we needed at this time. We have so many huge challenges ahead, and I do not see where the money will come from in order to meet all these objectives.
And integrating from EU reform and EU enlargement, maybe also are these two things something that goes hand in hand? And what about Ukraine accession to the EU?
I start with the effects of the Ukraine war on these three goals that you said, and then I also want to answer some of the other questions. So very quickly on the climate, what I can see in policy is already negative. If you look at the Repower EU program, they undermine the environmental standards that we fought for in the recovery fund heavily, and said, "Oh, we need energy independence fast, so let's just build gas and oil infrastructure," and without explaining how that would actually create energy independence in the short term. Because the short term, we talk about 1-2 years. So what do you build to create energy independence in this short period of time? that can actually, that there's a gas and oil infrastructure. There's some things, LNG floating terminals, other stuff. But everything that has a longer completion period, you can also build sustainable energy sources. Yeah? So it doesn't really but it's used, this energy independence argument, Russia evil, is used to undermine environmental standards without any reason. Yeah? And then if I look at the cost shock of energy prices rising for our industries and what it means for transformation, you could say, oh, energy prices rise. So investments in renewables, even within, or energy saving initiatives within my company, are more beneficial because they save more cash. But in order to do these investments, you need to cash to do that. And if currently you are an energy heavy or dependent industry, and let's say, I don't know, your cost structure is built with 30% energy costs, if the prices double, then it wipes out all your margin that you could potentially use to invest. So how are you going to make the transformation if you don't have the money to transform? And that's, I think, a question that we will now see more and more, and we need to see what we do also from a state's perspective there. On the rule of law, I thought one positive impact could be that it separates Hungary and Poland. Yeah? I mean, if you look at their position towards Russia, there is whatever you call it, like a thing going in between the two, and so we need to see how this plays out. Yeah? But apart from that, I don't see so many positive developments. On the defense union, I mean, we talked about it. I think I hope that there's a positive impetus. I just hope also that we take learnings from the Second World War and we don't give too much power to a smaller group of people to define where an army should go. I mean, there's some safeguards maybe that are necessary. When it comes to the question of EU citizens feeling European and versus the states, in the elections of both Hillary Clinton versus Trump, as well as Biden versus Trump, you could talk to people on the street everywhere in Europe, and they would tell you, in Georgia too, we need 2 more votes for Biden in order to win another electoral college seat. And you're like, how the heck do you know about these elections? Like, how do you know every detail about these elections in another continent and country? I mean, how do you know that? And I think the reason is because people understand the historic impact of that vote for them, even though they don't live even in these countries. And I think, the biggest marketing exercise that a democracy has is elections. So why do we spend millions from the Commission and the Parliament side on trying to communicate the best possible way about, here's European projects? And so when we could actually fix this by also making the elections decide about the history of the European Union, and then people would care. And then you don't have to tell people that they need to feel European because they feel it if it's a conservative or a social democratic government. I think it's, for me, at least the core point. And let me see what the last point was. Accession. I'm not a foreign policy expert. Who was it that asked about accession? In the beginning, I thought, don't do it because then Putin will run over the whole country. Because, I mean, if you say, if you don't run over the country, it will actually join the European Union. The incentive for him is to, take it. But now, then, if you talk to Ukrainian MPs and they tell you, hey, it's really important for our morale, it's really important for our perspective, then I think it's the right thing to do. And they are a self-determining nation. If they want that, and then we should be open to accept their accession bid. And yes, it will be a super long path, but I think it's the right thing at the right point. How it will play out, I don't know. I really am having a crash course in strategic and war, war strategy at Clausewitz and all of this, because it's. I honestly don't know. I don't know what how this will all play out at the moment. I'm trying to grapple with it, but I don't know. So that's all.
Thanks. Maybe one last round of questions from our online audience before coming to an end.
Yeah. Maybe last question.
Yeah, we can maybe have 2 and last 2.
Yeah. Briefly, there was some have already been answered more or less. One was about the cultural shift from west to east of Europe, and also touching upon enlargement. What kind of Europe is emerging from this process? Another one was about the knowledge gap, which was also partially answered already in Europe. How to convince citizens to believe and fight for Europe. How to convince them that the EU is the antidote to nationalism, for example. And how to make citizens see the real achievements of policies. And the last one could be on it was about the prosperity that is currently in Europe, and how to maintain this in the future, and how to let people understand that we will need to have a solidarity to address the challenges we are facing.
Okay. I don't know if I got them all. It's already almost 8. I got up at 4:30 this morning, so I'm not sure I have it all in my mind, but I just pick what I like and then you tell me.
Mr. Goerens will integrate after.
Actually, I think we talked about prosperity and solidarity quite openly, so I don't know if I should comment on this. On nationalism, today I had an interview where people asked me whether it's now time to abolish a nation and we should finally go to Europe of the regions and the European Union as the overarching governing body. And I'm always like, I don't know, but like it's not my first priority right now. I think, because like we have a nation level administration, and to abolish it would cost a lot of political capital, and I don't even see the path there at this point. So how about we get to fix the European Union as a level, what kind of decisions we need to take and how we take them, very simply, like what kind of competence should we have in the different fields, because it's also not enough to say we have defense or health, because in health, what is the competence that we need to have? Pandemic response plan, vaccination, purchasing plan. I mean, there is different things like that we need to have, I think, competences for. And then let's fix that basically the power balance is not so shifted towards the national level right now, but that we have a second chamber in the European Union that is actually functioning. There can be a US Senate kind of chamber, it can be a Bundesrat kind of chamber, which sole purpose it is to ensure that the levels below are not infringed upon in their competences by whatever European Union level is deciding. So subsidiarity safeguarding. I think that's what they should be doing. And then we can talk about, what we get to. So why do I talk about this? I don't think that if people have a certain connection to their nation, and that's also true for Eastern European countries a lot, because they're very young very often and they have just regained their nation status. Let's not say that liking your nation is something bad right now. I think it's not the path to success. For me, the path is more to say, look, let's talk about identity. We have local identities. I'm the youngest of 4. It's my brother identity. We have a football club identity. We have the national identity. We also should potentially or could develop a European identity, but it should always be an open one where people are invited to also assume that identity if they choose so, and then we're happy. So go to Cologne, to Carnival, to see what an open identity looks like, and they have a strong identity, but it's very open. I think it's a very good example of where we should go. So let's not play the nation against the European Union, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think the most important question is what kind of Europe do we expect? My answer is the following. We do need a European Union, an adapted European Union, an institutionally upgraded European Union, capable to be successful in the challenges we meet for the time being. There are 3 areas where we do need a strong dialogue with all the partners: health, security, and climate. And even we'll have to discuss even with dictators, with China, with Russia. We cannot exclude a single country of dialogue concerning these 3 dialogues. That means that the European Union must have or keep its leadership, at least in climate, perhaps in security, and surely in health, because we are the most performant after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic to produce vaccines. We had a huge delay, but nevertheless, we have been able to overcome the situation by a very active part played by commissioners like Thierry Breton, who was able to give an impulse to the producers of vaccines, and now we are leaders in this regard. Nothing is impossible in this regard. My last part of my answer: we must keep our capacity to create international standards. One example: our security is partly challenged by interferences from outside. Cambridge Analytica, Russian trolls, and so on. The European answer is not a perfect one, but it's a try to give the European Union a dimension, a capacity to deal with this kind of threats. I think that the Digital Single Act, and I still believe it's a beginning of an appropriate answer to have international standards. If we start this process, the others cannot ignore what we have done in this regard. And that's what I call international standards. We have been successful over the past, and we have to find. It's not a niche, but it's very important. It's important for the survival of our globe. It's very important to be part of this world by playing a huge role in these three areas. Once again, health, security, climate. I have not invented these three areas where the European Union can never be absent, but it's no less than Geoffrey Sachs, the most important advisor to Secretary General of the United Nations on climate matters. He told me that these three areas, European Union must be everywhere, with everybody, and in the leading front.
Thank you very much. I think we ran a little bit over time, but I would like to have a round of applause for our two guests. And thank you for giving the opportunity to the IEE community to debate and discuss on that. And I invite everyone to a light networking drink